my previous video of the Pura 90S Pro Max, you guys left me over 180 comments with tons of questions about the phone. So I'll fulfill this video's promise of doing a video based on your questions after using this phone for 2 weeks. So watch first and buy smart. So both Matthew Rumble and Funtime Crazy 3620 asked, why is 5G a big thing on this phone? Isn't that a normal phone thing by now? Nope. It's not normal for a Huawei phone specifically, because here's the actual context. So Huawei's last global flagship to officially ship with 5G was the Huawei Mate 40 series way back in October 2000. Right after that, the US tightened the export rules that blocked any chip foundry using American tech supplying to Huawei with 5G chips. So after 5 years, every Huawei flagship sold outside of China has been stuck on 4G. So even when Huawei brought back 5G domestically with the Mate 60 in China back in year 2023, that was just the China market, not the global variant. So that's why the Pura 90S Pro Max is the first time since year 2020 that Huawei is putting the 5G NR on the spec sheet for the phone sold internationally. Now just for context, 5G NR is a technical name for actual 5G because it's using real radio standards, not just a label, and that is why the comment section basically exploded. So it's not just for the sake of hype, it's actually a proper 5G comeback. Then there was a question from Elesia Tico which asked, does it work properly on carriers like T-Mobile in the US? Well, Huawei phones are not officially sold through US carriers, so US carriers compatibility isn't something that we have also tested here in the studio, and I haven't gone to US ever since WWDC, so yeah. But connectivity side, from what I've tested around Klang Valley area or KL City area since 2 weeks ago, and even right now, it held up very well, where there was instant signal recovery the moment I stepped out from lifts, from basement car parks, and even steady speeds in a weak signal or a very crowded area. Now, as usual, a disclaimer that this particular performance or actual performance of the signal may vary depending on the environmental factors or which building or basement that you're in. And a lot of you actually asked if this is on Android 16. So yes, the phone is shipped with EMUI version 16, which is built on Android 16's open source base, where it is the first time that the Pura series have been upgraded to this AOSP generation, and Huawei has pitched this overall system to 5 pillars. Number 1 is broader app compatibility with the new API support. Number 2 is the tighter security with upgraded encryption. Number 3 is smarter AI driven system performance. Number 4 is one-tap patch updates, and number 5 is better multilingual search across the system. Then Mahmoud Amin wanted to know what's the real difference between the Chinese version and also this global variant. Well, the straight answer is that the China market of the Pura 90 without the S, because S stands for global, it runs on the Harmony OS, which is Huawei's own operating system, which is very well known in China and also globally as well. And this new Harmony OS is not built on Android anymore, but this global Pura 90 S series runs on EMUI 16, which is Android based. Then there were questions about banking apps, crypto wallets, Google apps that came up more than almost anything else in the comments. So let's actually answer it properly. So yes, based on my tests for the past 2 weeks, you can actually use Google apps on this, and it's a lot easier right now because most of the essential apps are already sitting on Huawei's app gallery, including things like Touch and Go or your banking apps. And for anything that is missing, the system actually guides you step by step so you can get it installed properly. So there's no complicated workaround like how it was on the previous generation Huawei before the Pura 80. Then app maintenance is also simple, where one tap updates everything at once, so you do not need to manually update every single time. Again, a huge issue for the previous generation Huawei phones. But one thing to note is that certain bank apps do have their own requirements over time, so there might be a specific time where you need to go on into the app and do a manual update. So that is something worth checking before you fully commit on a Huawei phone. And yes, as you guys can clearly see that on my app screen, you can see all of my Google apps and all of my usually used apps over here, and there's no issues thus far. Then there were 3 specific feature checks asked from Saw Omen. The first one is that if you long press an image, will it extract text? Second one, can you select a barcode by opening the camera app directly? And if you double tap the screen, can you wake it? Well, firstly, touching and holding an image in the gallery only brings up an option to drag the image to Huawei Super Hub. But when it comes to trying that in a browser though, that brings brings up the usual save image options, so that does not work. And when it comes to scanning QR codes by opening the camera app directly, it doesn't pop up a link like how it does on an iPhone or even a Samsung device, but instead the camera interface features a specific button which then triggers a separate QR scanning application, and double tapping the screen to wake works. Next, Panash Chitaro 2602 asks, is there an AirDrop style file sharing feature from Huawei devices with the iPhones? Well, there is supposedly a cross-device sharing feature with iOS through this app called Petal Interconnect app. And after 2 weeks in, it worked flawlessly. So you can easily share files between this phone with an iPhone. So while Ops Jose 06B says you can't because this is EMUI, but yes, you can with this Petal Interconnect app. Then another popular question is that if this works with Android Auto or even CarPlay. Well, there were comments on the question that says that it works, but for some strange reason, it did not work for us here in the studio. Hopefully a software update would fix this, but of course CarPlay is an Apple exclusive to iPhone, so that is not going to be happening on here regardless of the phone. The one comment worth addressing is from Muhammad Faisal 4052, who wants a bigger cell like a 7000 milliamps given the Pro Max size. Well, that is a fair ask, but 6000 milliamps is already a significant jump over last year's generation global unit, and packing more capacity without having the extra bulk is also a trade-off as well. Now personally for me, in my actual use for the past 2 weeks as my main phone, I was landing about 8 hours of screen on time, and keep in mind that that's a real world numbers with lots of camera and AI feature testing on the phone, which is heavier than your average day of scrolling and messaging. So casual users might see a bit more when it comes to this amazing battery. Next is the cameras, because this is possibly the most debated topic in the comments, because a bunch of you said that the camera feels like a downgrade compared to the previous Pura 80 Ultra. So let's actually break down what changed, because there is truth on both sides. So the Pura 80 Ultra had a switchable dual telephoto setup which had 2 separate tele lenses giving you a 3.7 times and 9.4 times optical zoom that you could switch between. But this particular Pura 90S Pro Max moves to a single telephoto lens instead. But it comes with a massive 200 megapixel sensor instead at 1/1.28 inch. The largest sensor that Huawei has put behind a zoom lens, which is fixed at 4 times optical zoom at f2.6. Then the variable aperture is still here, but now it's on the main camera from f1.4 to f4.0, which is a 10-stage adjustable range. So it's not on the telephoto lenses, but it's on the main lens instead. But here's the honest way to frame it, pun intended. Because if you specifically love having 2 distinct optical zoom ranges to switch between, well, that flexibility is gone. But what you get instead is a bigger sensor which captures more light and details at 4 times range, and with everything beyond that, like 10 times, 20 times, is digital or hybrid zoom by using that huge sensor, which is not a true optical zoom, but the quality look great as you guys can see in the camera sample. So that is a genuine trade-off, but not a straight up downgrade. And here's a direct side-by-side comparison photo between the Pura 80 Ultra with the Pura 90S Pro Max, specifically for the telephoto lenses for the 4 times, the 10 times and the 20 times here in the studio, for you to be the judge on which you prefer. And here's also a front camera test on both phones too. Now unfortunately I do not have the Mate 80 Pro Max to compare with, so I hope that answers your curiosity, Dripta and Roy M540. Now I did see a comment coming from Sib10 Anwar 4526 about whether it's worth switching from the iPhone 17 Pro Max to this phone. Well, battery life means yes. Because the battery life on my iPhone 17 Pro Max sucks. But specifically when it comes to video stabilization, here is another side-by-side comparison for you to be the judge once again. Now with that, if you're finding this video helpful so far, do give this video a nice big thumbs up to tell the people running the YouTube algorithm that this video was helpful and good for you. And a subscription would be extra sweet too. So thank you, and thank you very much in advance, as we're aiming towards 300,000 subscribers, God willing, before the end of the year. Okay, real talk. A lot of you actually point out that I didn't mention the chipset and all, and especially I didn't do any gaming or performance tests that got skipped immediately. Well, because it's a first impressions video anyway, but let's fix that, okay? So the Pura 90S Pro Max runs on Huawei's own Kirin 9030S, which is a 5nm class chip. But since Huawei still doesn't have access to the most advanced overseas foundries due to the same export restrictions mentioned earlier, it's a slightly downclocked version of the Kirin 9030 Pro, which is found on the Mate 80 Pro and the Mate X7. So it's not the same chip, it's not as strong when it comes to the GPU side, but it's still solidly mid-pack on the Antutu scores and also the Geekbench scores compared to this year's Snapdragon and MediaTek's flagship chips, which is genuinely the phone's so-called weak specs related spot. Because remember that this phone was built on the imaging and also the overall connectivity rather than raw gaming horsepower. But in terms of actual gaming tests, there were no overheating issues, and feel free to pause this video to see the actual settings on Genshin Impact for you guys to gauge the actual gaming performance. So that's your answer, Jiren E6i. Then as for your request LLRMXT, here's a real-world app opening speed test side by side, not synthetic benchmarks. Then there was a comment coming from Daniel Tilda Moro 9706 being very unsatisfied with the flat display compared to having a curved screen from the previous generation. Well, the design is a real shift, going from a flat frame to Huawei's usual curved glass from the previous Pura phones. Now this could be based on a personal preference because the majority of the flagship phones are already moving towards flat screen displays, and I do agree with what Huawei is doing over here because I personally feel that flat displays are better because of how it feels in the hand, and also flat displays are also cheaper to replace compared to curved ones too. Then as a response to James Luke 4902, here's a confirmation that the anti-reflective and the scratch resistant Kunlun glass is only a Pro Max feature, where the regular Pro gets the second generation Kunlun glass for drop and scratch resistant without being anti-reflective. But here are some very interesting comparison questions. Both Owame Marema and Kelani Legion asked for a direct comparison against the Oppo Find X9 Ultra. Well, I have to give back the review unit of the Oppo Find X9 Ultra to DirectD, so I do not have the phone with me, so sorry about that, my friend, and welcome to the channel, and I appreciate your kind words, Owame and Kelani. And then Kane8248 asks, Vivo X300 Ultra versus Pura 90S Pro Max, which is better? And well, if it's my personal pick, I would go with the Vivo X300 Ultra because of its better video capabilities, because that has been improved significantly. And while it adds to the cost, the extra telephoto physical lens makes the whole experience a lot more different. So that is my answer. Now, if you want a written version of this video, we do have one at our website at www.adamlobo.tv. Links to the website will be down below, where we also have some daily tech tips and daily tech news over there too. Next, let's look at the quick fire questions, shall we? Reverse wireless charging. Yes, it's supported on the Pro Max. Then to answer its Brit directly when it comes to software updates, well, if you got the automatic software updates switched on, you don't need to manually update them. But here's the honest part when it comes to the software updates and why I did not mention that in my previous video, because Huawei doesn't actually publish very clearly like X amount of OS updates or Y amounts of security patches that every other smartphone company does. Now, the official line that Huawei has always said is that updates are provided throughout the years. That's about it. Which sounds nice, but that doesn't really tell you anything concrete per se. So realistically, we are kind of guessing how long of a meaningful support lasts over here rather than working off on an actual published number. But if I had to guesstimate, probably around 3 years of OS updates and maybe 5 years of security patches. But that is my estimated prediction based on me using previous Huawei devices. Then one request came in from Patishav asking whether I could measure the screen flicker. Well, a very fair ask, especially if you're someone very sensitive to that. So instead of just telling you it's fine, I'll actually show you, and here's how it works. I shot the Pura 90S Pro Max screen at slow motion at low brightness because that is usually when the PWM flicker shows up the most, since that is how the display dims itself without just turning down the backlight directly. So if there's flicker, what happens is that you'll actually see visible dark bands or strobing sweeping across the screen in a slow-mo clip. But if the screen is smooth with no banding at all seen, then that's a very good sign. All of this means that the dimming is either high frequency enough to not be visually caught, or it's not using aggressive PWM at low brightness. So yes, as you can see over here, there is some bending over here at the lower brightness settings. Now, a quick disclaimer, this isn't a lab grade equipment, so I can't give you the exact hertz number like a proper oscilloscope scope test world, but it is a useful way to actually see if there is any sort of a flicker. So that's the conclusion, and that's every real question from the comment section. Now, a huge thank you for all of y'all for engaging, and especially all of the very kind words to say about this video, especially for the ones who are new to the channel as well. Hello and welcome. Now, if there's anything else that I miss or something that you still want to get tested, do let me know in the comment section below.